It's Brian Preston, the Money Guy.
All right, we've got a question from General Aviation Guru. He says, can you guys expand on where to go for risk management? How do you find an independent agent for life insurance and umbrella? How do you find a good lawyer? And where do mutants go to find these types of pros for these, risk management, important big ticket items?
So how do you find insurance agents? And then how do you find attorneys? Was that the one?
Yeah, he said a good lawyer.
A good lawyer, attorney.
And basically for all people, all of those kinds of people who would help you with risk management. That was the overarching question.
So Brian, it might be valuable to talk a little bit about, even inside of the insurance world, there's really two types of agents, right? There are captive agents and there are independent agents. Talk a little bit about what that means and how that affects your decision for buying insurance or who you're going to use as an agent.
Yeah, captive agents can only sell products that are offered by the who they've affiliated with. Whereas sometimes the broker model allows you kind of to have access to the whole menu of offerings, companies, and so forth. And by the way, this is actually under threat. The captive agent, I've seen a lot of stuff out there in the financial media where some of these captive agencies have realized, hey, we're having a hard time getting people who are saying they only want to work with me. So they've considered opening up their business models to more of a brokerage type thing. I like people who have more tools in their tool belt. It's the whole Batman analogy. It's much better if they have the utility belt around their waist versus somebody who can only pull. If they have a screwdriver in their pocket, great. If they don't, you're kind of screwed. It's nice if they have access to a bunch of different resources for you. And then so I'm going to let Bo kind of get the technical, but I'll give you the feel part of it. I always tell people, be careful, because when you get in, I love insurance for protection. I have lots of it. That's why I think we get a bad rap when people say we're anti-insurance. Nope, you just go look at what I have on my family. We've tried to because that's what it's supposed to mitigate your risk of the bad stuff happening. But there is a standpoint. Find somebody who works in insurance that's already got a level of success that selling you a product then go put food on the table for their family. And I hate to be that way because we've all been in the hungry part of our career where it's just questionable on if we're going to make it or not. And I get, there's just so many people trying to get into the financial field. And the first thing they do is hit friends, family, and relatives and start trying to sell and pitch products. I like working with people who actually are experts in their field. They don't need to sell you a product to pay for their family, because that's going to allow them to be more of the consultant to actually sell you something. And here's the other second thing, and then I'll let you do the technical part, Bo. Know as much as you can, because an educated consumer is not going to get ripped off like somebody who's just going off the emotional plays that somebody who's trying to sell a risk element, because that's what I don't like, how sometimes products that try to scare you into buying them, and insurance is definitely one of those things, can take you off kilter of knowing, beginning with the end in mind and getting the right plan.
Yeah, every year. So I use an independent insurance agent for both my property and casualty as well as for my life insurance and that sort of thing. And what I love is every year when it comes up for renewal for my homeowners and for my auto insurance and for the other types of insurances that I carry, the agent will say, hey, it's time for renewal. Just so you know, I went ahead and I was able to run quotes across these 4 different companies. And these are the 4 companies, the quotes, and here are the differences in coverages and here are the difference in price. And what it allows me to do is look at the differences. I can see, and I'll always ask, okay, what do you recommend? And they'll recommend one. And sometimes it's the least expensive, and that's a pretty easy thing to justify. But sometimes it's not the least expensive, but they'll tell me, hey, this is why, because this coverage is better, because this makes more sense for your personal situation. I love having that person give me some options, because it allows me to feel like I am part of the decision-making process. I'm not just sitting in the backseat saying, hey, tell me what I want to buy. So I love what you said about being an educated consumer. It's the exact same thing when it comes to buying life insurance. There are tons of tools out there where you can go run free insurance quotes. If you want to know how much a 10-year term, 20-year term, 30-year term costs, you can go do that. Answer a few questions, get an immediate quote, and then you can be equipped that when you go talk to someone and they say, hey, you should buy this $100,000 whole life policy, and you can ask the question, well, hey, I saw that, this $100,000 term policy was like a tenth of the cost. Why are you recommending that? And the person sitting on the other end of the table ought to be able to describe it in a way that you understand. I used to always tell people this, whenever it comes to like financial stuff, and this is how I would choose an attorney as well for like estate planning. When they tell you something, you ought to be able to take what they tell you, go to the grocery store, get in the grocery store line, and be able to explain to the person behind you what they just told you. It ought to make sense on that level. And if they can't break it down on that level, then one of two things, either perhaps they're not a great communicator or perhaps what they're recommending doesn't make sense in your situation. Now, I imagine that analogy will fall apart at some places, but that's what we do as financial advisors. I tell folks all the time, hey, if you don't understand what I'm saying, and if you could not regurgitate this to your brother-in-law, then tell me, let me come up with a different way to explain it, because any financial decision that you make, it ought to make sense to you. Unfortunately, Brian, we've had this a number of times when it comes to estate attorneys. We'll be working with a client, we'll review the estate plan, and it's an amazing estate plan if it were designed for someone who had $100 million. But for this client who's under most estate thresholds, they just needed simple estate documents and it did not align. They were kind of sold a strategy that was sophisticated and well thought out, but not applicable. So you need to kind of approach all of these decisions with a little bit of common sense. Does this make sense for me?
Yeah, that's you're talking about kind of a paper factory. There's seminar attorneys that are doing a one size fits all for everybody. Be very careful of those. I would tell you attorneys, because I'm glad you kind of closed it out with that. Because look, in the beginning, your life is somewhat simple. You're probably primarily just concerned about do the kids that we have, do we know what happens when we can't talk for ourselves and who's going to take control? And so there's some online options there. But once you reach a level of sophistication, you probably will want an attorney, because every state has different estate laws, different rules. So you'll probably want to get an attorney in your neck of the woods. And so now you say, well, how do I figure that out? Well, here's the first thing you can do. Is you can call any attorney you've been referred to or somebody talking, just basically call the office and say, hey, look, I'd like to set up an appointment, but before the appointment, I'd love to get your data gathering form so that I can make sure that our first meeting to design my estate plan is as effective as possible. If they don't have that, that might be an indicator of maybe they don't do a lot of estate planning, because we try to load up our clients with, so that when you sit down with that attorney, because realize they get paid by the hour, that you are as effective and efficient as possible to get that. It serves two purposes. It gets the cost as low as possible, but it also lets the meeting get as much in there as you can. So you asking them, hey, is there an uptake form? Is there a data gathering form that I can do beforehand to help us have a great conversation? Based upon the input and feedback you get on how good that form looks and all the things it covers, is go probably share with you how well and how often this attorney does this type of stuff.
Great.